My doctor said it was just dry skin. He was wrong. Welcome to Monster Motel. I was sitting on the couch watching the evening news when an itch started on my left forearm. It was just above the wrist. Without looking, I reached over to scratch it. I froze. That wasn't the sound of fingernails on skin. It was a dry, grating noise. It sounded like bone scraping against a rock. The sound vibrated up my arm and settled in my teeth. It made my stomach flip. I looked down at my arm. There was a patch of skin there that looked like old, dried-up leather sewn onto my flesh. It wasn't red. It wasn't a rash. It was gray and dull. I pressed my thumb into it, expecting it to be soft or maybe a little puffy. It didn't give way. It was hard. It felt like there was a flat stone buried right under the surface. It was cold to the touch, colder than the rest of my arm. I rubbed it again, slower this time. It felt like sandpaper. It felt dead. That was the first sign. I tried to tell myself it was just dry skin from the winter air. I put lotion on it. The lotion just sat on top of the hard patch, greasy and useless. It didn't soak in. It couldn't. A week later, I was getting ready for work. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to button my blue dress shirt. I had done this 1,000 times. It should have been easy, but my fingers felt thick. They felt like they were wearing heavy, invisible gloves. I held the small white button in my right hand and tried to push it through the hole with my left. My left thumb wouldn't bend. The knuckle was stiff, like a rusted hinge. I pushed and fumbled. The button slipped out of my grip. I tried again. Sweat started to prickle on my forehead. "Come on," I whispered to myself. I looked at my hand. The skin on my knuckles looked tight and shiny. I tried to make a fist. I couldn't. My fingers curled halfway and then stopped, hitting an invisible wall. The stiffness from my wrist had crept down into my hand. It was spreading. I gave up on the shirt. I threw it on the floor and put on a loose sweater instead. I felt a knot of fear tightening in my chest, heavy and cold. Breakfast was worse. My wife, Sarah, was at the table, reading on her tablet. She looked up and smiled. "Coffee's fresh?" she said. "Thanks," I mumbled. I reached for my favorite mug. It was white with a chip on the rim. I wrapped my hand around the handle. My brain told my fingers to squeeze, to lift, but the signal got lost somewhere. My hand stayed in a rigid, open claw. I couldn't close my grip. I tried to force it, jerking my arm. The mug slipped. Crash. Hot coffee splashed over the counter and onto the floor. Ceramic shards skittered across the tiles. Sarah jumped up, her chair scraping loudly. "David, are you okay?" I stared at the mess. I stared at my hand. It was still stuck in that open claw shape. It looked like a tool, not a part of a human body. I dropped it," I said. My voice sounded small. Sarah came over and took my hand. Her skin was warm and soft. It felt shocking against mine. She frowned, running her thumb over my knuckles. "David, you're freezing," she said. She pressed harder. "And your skin, it feels so hard, like wood." "I know," I said. "I think I need to see a doctor." Dr. Miller was an old man with kind eyes and shaky hands. He had been my doctor since I was a kid. He poked and prodded my arm. He tapped on my knuckles with a little hammer. It made a dull, clicking sound. He frowned. "Unusual dermal texture," he muttered. He sent me to a specialist, then for blood work, then for a biopsy. The waiting was the worst part. While we waited, the stiffness moved. It traveled up to my shoulder. It crept across my collarbone. It felt like I was wearing a suit of armor that was slowly shrinking. Finally, the call came. I went back to Dr. Miller's office. He didn't look kind anymore. He looked sad. "Calcification," he said. The words sounded heavy. "It's rare, very aggressive in your case. Your body is depositing calcium into the small blood vessels in your skin and fat tissue. Essentially, you are calcifying." "Turning to stone?" I asked. He didn't correct me. "There is no known cure, David. We can try to manage the pain." The walls of the small office felt like they were closing in. I walked out to the car where Sarah was waiting. I told her. She cried. I wanted to cry too, but my face felt stiff. It was getting harder to move my cheeks. Life became a series of losing battles. Tying my shoes became impossible. Sarah had to buy me slip-ons. Typing on a keyboard was out of the question. My fingers were fused into solid hooks. I had to take leave from work. I spent my days sitting in the recliner, the only chair I could get out of. My mind started to feel as trapped as my body. That's when the world started to change. I was looking out the window one afternoon. The wind was blowing. A red car was parked across the street. Suddenly, the car rippled. The metal stopped shining. It turned a dull, flat gray. The tires stopped looking like rubber and looked like grindstones. It looked like a statue of a car carved out of granite. I blinked, shaking my head. The car was red again. It happened more and more. I'd look at the trees, and the leaves would stop moving. They would turn into thin, gray shards of slate. The grass looked like a field of green needles made of glass. I knew it wasn't real. It was my mind projecting my own horror onto the world. I felt like stone, so I saw stone. My brain was panicked, racing 1,000,000 miles an hour, while my body was slowing down to a halt. It was a terrible contrast. Inside, I was screaming and running. Outside, I was a statue. Sarah tried everything. She cooked healthy meals. She massaged my legs with expensive oils. But the physical barrier between us was becoming an emotional one. One evening, she sat on the arm of my chair. She reached out to stroke my cheek. I flinched. I pulled my head away. "David?" she asked, hurt flashing in her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Don't," I rasped. My voice was changing too. My vocal cords were hardening. "I can't feel it, Sarah." "What do you mean?" "When you touch me, I don't feel your hand. I feel pressure, distant and dull, like you're poking a wall. It just reminds me of what I've lost." I lifted her, my eyes stinging. "I'm not a man anymore. I'm a monster in a shell. You shouldn't have to touch a monster." "Stop it," she sobbed, grabbing my rigid hand. "You are my husband." But I couldn't squeeze her hand back. I couldn't offer her any comfort. Her warm tears fell onto my hand, and I watched them roll off my skin like water off a duck's back. They didn't soak in. Nothing could get in anymore. The armor tightened. It moved to my chest. A solid plate formed over my ribs. Breathing became a manual labor. I had to focus on every breath. In, barely an inch of expansion. Out, a shallow wheeze. I felt like I was buried in sand up to my neck, the weight crushing me. Then came the morning it ended. I woke up, and I knew immediately. The silence in the room was heavy. I tried to roll over. Nothing happened. My legs were fused together at the knees and ankles. My hips were locked. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my brain. "Move," I commanded my arm. "Lift." My arms stayed on the mattress. It was a heavy log. I opened my eyes. The hallucinations were back, and this time they didn't blink away. The ceiling wasn't drywall. It was the roof of a cave, rough and gray. The sunlight filtering through the curtains wasn't light. It was falling dust, gray and suffocating. My bedside table had turned to rock. The lamp was a sculpture of a lamp. Sarah stirred beside me. "David?" she mumbled sleepily. I tried to turn my head to look at her. My neck was a solid pillar. I couldn't turn. I could only stare straight up at the stone ceiling. "David?" Her voice was more awake now. She sat up. I could hear the rustle of the sheets, but they sounded like dry leaves scraping together. She leaned over me. Her face came into my view. For a second, she looked like herself. Then my broken mind twisted her. Her skin turned to marble. Her eyes became dark, polished stones. Her hair was a cascade of carved waves. "David, why aren't you moving?" The panic in her voice was real. cutting through my hallucination. I tried to answer. I sent the signal to my jaw to open. Speak. Tell her you love her. My jaw didn't move. It was fused shut. My tongue felt like a heavy stone in my mouth. I pushed air from my lungs, trying to force a sound past my calcified vocal cords. That was it. A dry, dusty exhale. Sarah screamed. It was a high, terrified sound. "David! Oh God, David!" She grabbed my shoulders. She shook me, but I didn't wobble like a person. I rocked like a mannequin. I was solid. "Call 911!" she yelled to herself, scrambling off the bed. I lay there, staring at the gray ceiling. I was fully locked in. The walls of my world had finally closed all the way. And then, the fading began. It wasn't just my movement, it was everything. First, the sense of touch vanished completely. Sarah was holding my hand again. I could see her doing it, but I felt nothing. No warmth, no pressure. My body had become a separate object, something that didn't belong to me anymore. Then the temperature left. The cold that had been plaguing me dissolved. I wasn't cold and I wasn't hot. I just was. I existed in a void of temperature. My vision started to go. Since I couldn't blink, my eyes were drying out. The gray ceiling became blurry. The edges of my vision turned black. It was like a tunnel closing up. Sarah's face, hovering over me, became a smudge of color in the gray. "Stay with me, David. They're coming." Her voice sounded strange. That was the hearing going. Her voice didn't sound like it was in the room anymore. It sounded like it was coming from the end of a long metal pipe. It echoed. "David, David, 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 David." Then, the sound went underwater. A low, muffled thrumming. Then silence. The light faded to a dull gray, then to black. I am still here, inside. My heart is still beating, a frantic bird trapped in a stone cage. My mind is still racing, screaming, remembering. I can remember the feel of the sun. I can remember the taste of coffee. I can remember Sarah's smile. But outside, I am a statue. I am a monument to a man who used to live here. It is quiet now. The silence is absolute. It is the silence of an empty tomb, deep underground. I wait in the dark. I wait for the spark of my mind to finally fade, to join the rest of me in the stone. Until then, I am a prisoner in my own skin. Waiting. Just waiting.